It was 2 a.m. when the knocking started. Slow, hesitant, like someone was afraid to wake the past. I almost didn't open the door. It had been 5 years since I'd spoken to Lena, my former daughter-in-law, the one who'd ripped my son away from me and never looked back. But when I peeked through the curtain, I saw her standing in the rain, with a child clinging to her side, a little girl in a thin blanket. Her eyes were my son's eyes. "Please," Lena whispered when I opened the door. I didn't know where else to go. The wind smelled of storm and regret. I could have closed the door and gone back to sleep. After all, she had chosen to erase me once. But as the girl shivered and Lena's voice broke, I realized this night wasn't about revenge. It was about something buried long ago that had finally come knocking. And it was not alone. I was born in a town where doors stayed unlocked and people spoke softly after sunset. My mother said a home should sound like a prayer. Quiet, steady, full of thanks. I tried to make mine that way. I married young, to a mechanic with kind hands and a laugh that filled rooms. We bought this little house with a crooked porch and a stubborn front door that sticks in the summer. When my husband's heart failed, I learned how to fix the sticking myself. Sand, oil, patience. That's how I learned most things. By doing, then doing again. My son Michael arrived small and furious at the world. A red bundle with fists that never unclenched. He grew into his father's smile and my habits. Up early, lists on the fridge, shoes left neatly by the mat. He studied numbers like scripture, built bridges from calculations, and never missed church on Christmas even after he said he didn't believe anymore. We were two quiet people who could fill a house with simple routines. Tea at 9, news at 6. A shared blanket in winter with the dog at our feet. Lena came into our lives on a windy October afternoon. She wore a yellow scarf and looked at my son like she'd found the sun after living in shade. The first time she visited, she washed her cup and set it on the rack without being asked. She called me Mama June by the second week. I can still hear her laugh in the hallway. It sounded like new paint drying. Bright, promising, hiding old marks. For a while, that's what she was. A fresh coat over a life that had started to crack. When Michael told me they'd marry, I took out the quilt I'd been sewing in secret, cornflower blues and sunrise squares, and finished the last stitches with a thimble my mother left me. I gave them the quilt and a small envelope I'd saved for years. Enough for a down payment on a starter life. I didn't tell them I'd gone without new winter shoes that year, or that I'd sold my husband's socket set to a neighbor who still needed it. Love looks better when it doesn't complain. They moved to a neat apartment with white walls and a balcony that faced a line of maples. Sundays changed. My son started saying "we" instead of "I." I learned not to set 2 plates when he texted that they were eating with friends. Then came the first hairline fractures. My stew was too heavy, my curtains old-fashioned, my stories from another time. Nothing cruel, not at first. Just the gentle sanding away of a person's place in her own family. On the day the maples went red, Lena announced they were moving farther across town, closer to her job, farther from my porch. She hugged me and said, "We'll be here all the time." I smiled and nodded and folded the guest sheets anyway. Visits turned to visits with a reason. A borrowed ladder, a cake pan, tax questions. My son's laughter still filled rooms, but it had learned to check someone's eyes first. When they argued, he looked to her. When they celebrated, he looked to me. I pretended not to notice the switching seasons. The baby came during a thunderstorm. I waited in a hospital room that smelled like lemon and fear. When they placed the child in my arms, her fingers uncurling like tiny scrolls, I saw my husband's mouth on her face and gave thanks out loud. "Grace," I whispered to Lena. "Her name should be Grace." They named her something fashionable. I didn't mind. I kept Grace for myself. A private name like a spare key. After the baby, a different weather moved in. Money pinched. Sleep thinned. My son took extra shifts, and Lena counted diapers like coins. I showed up with casseroles and offers to watch the baby. Sometimes I was welcomed. Sometimes I was told gently that mom groups say boundaries are healthy. I agreed. Boundaries are fences that keep gardens safe. But there's a difference between a fence and a wall. The argument that ended it was small, like most endings. I gave the baby a ribbon, white with tiny blue flowers. Lena said it was a choking hazard. I said I'd worn ribbons all my childhood and never died. She said times change. I said love doesn't. My son stood between us, hands up, peacekeeper. When they left, the house felt heavy with unsaid things. Weeks stretched. Messages shortened. Photos of the baby arrived with captions, but no invitations. Then one afternoon, a final text from my son. We need space. Please don't drop by unannounced. Silence is a long hallway when you're alone. I kept the porch light on each night anyway. Not because anyone promised to come home, but because light is what a door deserves. On the mantel, next to the quilt I hadn't seen in years, I set a small tin of sugar cookies in case tiny hands ever reached for sweetness again. Some people call that foolish. I call it faith. The quiet habit of being ready, even when you don't know for what. So when the knocking came at 2 a.m., I wasn't surprised that it sounded like rain. Some storms arrived to break things. Some arrived to wash them clean. I didn't know which kind this was yet. I only knew I had a door, a light, and a name I kept for a child who didn't know it belonged to her. Morning came gray and wet. The kettle whistled, and I tried not to think about the woman and child asleep in my spare room. The same room where my son used to build his model airplanes. The rain had stopped, but the quiet afterward felt heavier than thunder. I stood at the window watching puddles gather under the maple tree when I heard soft footsteps behind me. Do you still take milk in your tea? Lena's voice was careful, as if she were asking permission to exist. She wore one of my flannel shirts. It hung on her like borrowed time. Yes, I said, same as always. We sat at the table with steam between us instead of conversation. The child, Ella, she told me later, peeked from the doorway, clutching a ragged bear. I smiled, but she hid again. The smell of damp clothes and lavender soap filled the kitchen. Finally, I asked, "Where's Michael?" Lena's spoon froze mid-stir. Her eyes reddened instantly, and when she spoke, her voice cracked. "He's gone, June. We've been separated a year. Last night he came by drunk. Said he wanted to see Ella. He got angry when I wouldn't let him drive her. I left before he woke up again. I couldn't risk it." The words landed one by one, heavy as stones. I wanted to defend my boy, the child I rocked through fevers and taught to pray. But the tremor in her hands told me there were things even a mother's love couldn't smooth over. "Did he hurt you?" I asked. She shook her head quickly, too quickly. "No, not this time, not this time." The phrase burned hotter than truth. The day stretched long. I busied myself with small mercies, drying their clothes by the fire, cooking oatmeal, finding crayons for Ella. The house felt alive again in a strange, aching way. Every giggle from that little girl mended something frayed inside me. After lunch, I stepped out to the porch for air. The neighbor across the street, Mr. Lowe, waved from his truck. "Everything all right, June?" "Saw lights on half the night." "Just company," I said. "Family." The word tasted unfamiliar, like something I hadn't spoken in years. When I came back in, Lena was standing by the mantel, staring at the photo of my son in his graduation robe. Her face was a storm held in. "He used to be so gentle," she whispered. "I don't know when it changed." "Life wears on men differently," I said. "But kindness shouldn't tear so easily." She turned to me, eyes swollen. "Do you hate me, June?" It was a question I had been building toward for years without knowing it. I took a breath. I wanted to. I tried to. But hate needs fresh fuel, and you took the fire with you when you left. Tears spilled before either of us could pretend otherwise. She started to apologize, but I lifted a hand. Whatever happened then is between you and him. What happens now is between you and that child. Evening crept in again, low and amber. Ella fell asleep on the couch, clutching her bear. Lena and I sat beside her, two silhouettes stitched by the firelight. "She has your eyes," I said softly. "She has his temper," Lena answered. We both laughed a little, and for the first time since the door had opened at 2 a.m., I felt something like peace. But peace never stays long in houses built from regret. The phone rang around 9. I almost didn't answer, but habit is stronger than sense. Michael's voice came through, hoarse and uneven. "Mom, is she there?" My heart pounded once, twice. "Yes." "Put her on, please." I looked at Lena. She shook her head so hard it hurt to watch. I pressed the receiver close. "Son, you need help, not an argument." He swore, loud enough for her to hear every syllable. "You're taking her side? Your own mother's turning on you?" "I'm not turning on you," I said quietly. "I'm holding the door you forgot how to knock on." Silence, then a click. The line went dead. Lena covered her face. "I should leave. He'll come here when he sobers up." "You'll stay," I told her. "Whatever comes, we face it in the light." But inside I was terrified, not of my son, but of the mirror his anger held up to me. All the years I had raised him to be strong, without showing him how to be gentle. That night I sat awake in the kitchen, the lamp throwing shadows across the linoleum. Lena and Ella slept down the hall. Outside, the rain started again, softer this time, like a warning whispered through leaves. I whispered back a promise. Whatever storm came next, no child would stand outside my door again. By morning, the rain had wrung the sky dry. The street looked scrubbed, mailbox flags still beaded with water, the maple shaking itself awake. I fried eggs and laid out toast soldiers the way I used to when Michael was small. Because remembering how to feed someone is a kind of prayer. Ella swung her feet under the chair and ate without looking up, the bear seated beside her, with a crust balanced on its paw. Lena watched the window more than her plate. "Do you have somewhere you're meant to be?" I asked. She swallowed. "We've been staying with a friend. Sofa, no door. Her landlord said no more overnight guests." She rubbed a thumb over a nick in the table. "I'm looking for a place. Every application asks for references. Michael always signed the paperwork. I didn't want to rock the boat." Boats sink from small holes, I thought, not just storms. After breakfast, I found the box of old crayons and a stack of printer paper. "Draw me your favorite thing," I told Ella. She drew a house with a fat sun in the corner and a lopsided swing under a tree. Then she added a tiny figure on the porch, a triangle dress, round eyes, hair like a gray halo. She labeled it slowly. Grace, Lena saw, and something in her face pulled tight. "Who taught you that name?" "I heard it," Ella said, not looking up. In a whisper, then turned to me. I lifted my hands. It came to me the day she was born. I kept it safe in case anyone needed it. She didn't answer, but for the first time she didn't flinch when I reached to smooth a strand of hair behind the child's ear. The doorbell rang at 10. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened it to find a woman in a blue cardigan and a man in a sheriff's jacket. The woman offered a sympathetic smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Miss Carter? I'm Denise with Family Services. This is Deputy Hall. We received a call about a possible custody issue. We just need to confirm the child is safe." My throat went dry. "She's safe," I said too quickly. "She's with her mother." The deputy tipped his hat. "Mind if we step in?" I did mind, but the law has a voice you can't pretend not to hear. I let them into the living room where Ella had built a castle from sofa pillows. She tucked behind the bear and peered out. Denise knelt. "Hi there, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Ella," she whispered. "And you're with your mom?" Denise looked up at Lena, whose hands were knitting themselves into knots. "Can you tell me what happened last night?" Lena drew a breath that sounded like it had splinters in it. "We left because Michael was drinking. He wanted to drive with her. I said no, he got angry. We came here. June, Ms. Carter, is family. Any protective orders on file? Deputy Hall asked gently. Lena shook her head. No, I kept hoping it would get better. Denise's pen clicked. Hoping is lovely, she said softly. But it isn't a safety plan. I felt a heat rise in me that had nothing to do with shame. What's the next step? We document, Denise said. We make sure Ella has a stable place for the next 72 hours. We'll recommend a temporary schedule and suggest you file for an emergency order if there's a pattern of risk. Do you have somewhere you can stay? Here, I answered before Lena could. They'll stay here. Lena stared. You don't have to. I know, I said. I'm choosing to. Deputy Hall scribbled on a card. If Dad shows up, call before it turns into anything. Don't try to mediate. Let us be the bad guys. I nodded like a student being given homework. After they left, the house felt like a bell that had been rung and was still humming. She's going to report me for leaving, Lena said. Arms wrapped tight around herself, she saw a mother who protected her child, I said, and a woman who needs a door with a lock. Lena's laugh was a dry leaf. He always said I was dramatic. Men who don't like mirrors call reflections drama, I said. It came out sharper than I meant. I softened my voice. We'll get you what you need. At noon, Mr. Lowe from across the street brought over a bag of groceries he accidentally bought 2 of. Milk, apples, spaghetti, a box of animal crackers that made Ella's eyes go wide. My Joan used to do this, he said, nodding toward the stove. Feed whoever showed up. Didn't matter if you knew their middle name. He patted the door frame like it was an old friend and left without waiting for thanks. The afternoon sagged with small tasks that felt like stitching. Laundry, phone calls, looking up attorneys who would talk in plain words. Lena moved through the rooms like a person trying to remember where she'd put herself down. When she passed the mantel, she stopped again at Michael's graduation photo. He promised me we'd never be like our parents, she whispered. Then we were worse because we knew better. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I kept thinking if I tried hard enough, he'd become who he was at 21. But memory is cheap bait. I wanted to defend my son again. Instead, I set 2 mugs on the coffee table and said, "Tell me the whole truth, not to punish him, to protect her." The whole truth came out like a rope, hand over hand, rough, leaving marks. The first night he didn't come home. The second, the third, the way he joked about needing to take the edge off after work became a ritual with friends whose names changed. The apology flowers that arrived 3 apologies too late. The dent in the drywall by the door. The way he sobbed when Ella was born and said he'd never deserve anything so good. Then spent a year proving it. I should have left sooner, she said, voice flat with exhaustion. Sooner is a kind of word people use when they weren't there, I answered. You left now. That's a clock too. Around 4, the phone rang again. I let it go to the answering machine. A dinosaur that still blinked like a lighthouse in storm seasons. Michael's voice filled the room. Mom, pick up. A pause. I know she's there. Another pause. A scrape. A sigh like he was lighting a match. They took my daughter. You let this happen. She's mine. Lena flinched. He'll come, she said. He always does when he says mine. I pressed the delete button. If he knocks, we'll be ready. We were not, of course. No one is ready to stand between past and present and tell one that the other gets the couch. At 6, the sky began to bruise. I was stirring sauce when headlights poured over the porch like water. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps. Then the knock. Not careful this time, not hesitant. The kind of knock a man uses when he still believes the world owes him a childhood. I wiped my hands and walked to the door. Who is it? Mom, he said. Just that, and my name. It was a softened blade. I opened the door partway. Michael stood there, rain flicking his hair into points. Jacket unzipped. Eyes rimmed red. Behind him, a woman leaned on the car hood, smoking. A too bright blouse. a smile like a crack. Not alone, the title had promised. Not just the child. "Let me in," he said. "Not with her," I replied. He glanced back. "It's just Kira. We're leaving. I'm taking Ella home." "This is her home tonight," I said. I kept my voice quiet the way you keep a horse from spooking. "You can come in if you come in alone." He took half a step forward, chest puffed with the old careless courage boy's mistake for manhood. "You don't get to." "Michael," I said, and the name was a blessing and a warning. "You were a baby in my arms once. I let you cry and didn't call that weakness. Don't make me call the deputy because you forgot how doors work." Something in him sagged then, shoulders dipping, breath leaving. He looked past me into the living room, where a small shoe lay abandoned by the rug. He swallowed so hard I could hear it. "I just want to see her." "You can," I said. "You'll sit on the sofa, and you'll speak softly, and you'll smell like coffee. Not what you smell like now. Then you'll say goodnight and you'll go." He swiped a hand over his face. "You always talk like church when you're mad." "I talk like I remember the boy you were." I stepped aside. "Alone?" He hesitated, then turned to the woman at the car. "Wait there," he called, teeth clenched. Kira rolled her eyes and flicked ash onto the wet driveway. "I'm not a dog." "Then you know how to sit," I said from the doorway before I could stop myself. It wasn't my best sermon. She smirked like she was keeping score and turned up the collar of her jacket. Michael stepped inside, bringing damp air with him. He looked bigger than the room that had raised him. Ella peeked from behind the armchair and his face broke into something plain and terrible. "Hey, Bug," he said, kneeling. "Daddy missed you." She didn't run to him. She looked at Lena first. When Lena nodded, Ella crossed the rug and pressed her face to his neck. He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, you could see the man I had believed would never be cruel to his own life. They sat on the sofa like a picture people argue about. Love and harm stitched so tight you can't find the seam. He asked about school and the bear's name and whether she still hated peas. She told him about a girl named Mia who wore glitter shoes and how the rain sounded like someone frying bacon on the roof. He laughed softly at that. The house exhaled. Then his hand started to shake. "I can take her tomorrow," he said to Lena without looking away from Ella. "Just to the park. A couple hours?" Lena's mouth opened, then closed. "You can come to the park with us," she said. "Here, in the daylight." His jaw tightened. "You don't get to set the rules." "Someone has to," I said. He stood too fast. Ella startled. He reached like he might grab her hand, then saw the deputy's card on the coffee table and snatched his fingers back like he'd touched a stove. "What? You called cops again?" He glared at Lena. "You want them to see you dragging my kid around to strange houses in the middle of the night?" "She's in her grandmother's house," I said. "You're not her grandmother," he snapped, and shame cracked across his face as soon as the words left it. He knew better. He had been raised by a woman who could love people she hadn't been given legal permission to love. "Blood is an address," I said quietly. "Family is a light left on." I turned to Ella. "Say goodnight, little bird." She hugged his leg. "Night, Daddy." He stood in the doorway, hand on the knob, breathing like a man who'd run too far to admit he was lost. "Mom," he said, and in the shape of that word I could hear 100 nights of homework and hot soup and ball games and forgiveness. "Help me." "I am," I said. "Sit with this feeling until morning without trying to fix it with a bottle. Call the clinic. I will drive you. Sign the papers. I will bring a pen. Show up every time you say you will. I will make soup." He stared at the floor, rain dripping from his sleeve to the mat in a slow metronome beat. Behind him, Kira honked the horn, one impatient stab that made Ella flinch. He flinched too. Then he stepped out into the wet. On the porch, he turned back. "You think I'm a monster? I think you're a son." I said. That's harder. He left without slamming the door. The car scraped away down the street, taillights smearing red along the puddles. When I turned, Lena was already gathering Ella's crayons. She stacked them carefully, like small bright debts. You shouldn't have to do this, she whispered. Wanting to is different than having to, I said. One grows you, the other hollows you out. Night came down full and clean. I moved through the house, turning off lamps, checking locks, tucking a blanket over a sleeping child who had drawn me a name I'd loaned her in secret. In the kitchen, I set out 3 bowls on the counter and wrote a note on the chalkboard where recipes used to go. Tomorrow, call the clinic, call the attorney, call the school, make a list for the grocery, buy ribbon, white with blue flowers. When I finally lay down, the storm had passed. The house listened to itself breathe. Somewhere deep where fear sleeps and hope keeps its keys, I felt something settle. The kind of quiet that comes not from the world going easy, but from choosing where to stand when it doesn't. In the distance, a siren wailed and thinned to nothing. I closed my eyes and pictured a porch light. Not mine this time, but Michael's, burning against a morning he might yet decide to open. I woke before the house did, the way nurses and mothers do when there's a list waiting. Dawn was only a pale thought behind the curtains. I made coffee and set out 3 mugs. Habit, hope, and hospitality lined in a row. Then I wrote today's commandments on a torn envelope. Clinic, attorney, school, locks, plan. Plans are the small bridges we build over water that hasn't risen yet. Lena came in wrapped in my old cardigan, sleeves swallowing her hands. I didn't sleep, she said, apologizing to the cup as if it were my guest. You'll sleep tonight, I said. We'll stack the day so high fatigue won't have a choice. Ella padded in, hair a wild crown, bear tucked like a secret under her arm. Can I draw on the envelope? She asked. Add a sun, I said. Put it in the corner where it always goes. While she drew, I dialed the clinic. A woman with a voice like warm tile answered. Intake, how can I help? My son needs a same-day evaluation, I said. Alcohol. Maybe more? He asked for help. I'm calling before his fear wakes up. We have an 11:40 slot if he arrives with an adult, she said. If he doesn't show, we'll reschedule once. After that, it's a wait list. I'll bring him, I said, and wrote the time between clinic and pen. Pens matter at thresholds. Signatures are the smallest hinges. Next, the attorney. I chose a name from last night's search. Someone whose reviews mentioned plain language and a stern kindness. Emergency temporary custody and a protective order. I told the receptionist. We have a child and a pattern. Bring documentation, she said. Messages, dates, witnesses, photographs if there are injuries. Any contact from law enforcement. We have a deputy's card, I answered, and a family services visit. We also have a grandmother who refuses to let storms rename her house. She paused just long enough to smile through the line. 2:00. Don't be late. By 8, we were dressed for paperwork. Clean faces, steady voices, the kind of clothes that ask clerks to look you in the eye. I packed a folder with copies. Lena's ID, Ella's birth certificate, the deputy's card, last month's text where Michael said, I'm sorry I scared you, the answering machine tape, a printed photo of the dent by their door. I tucked in a picture of Ella drawing a house. Sometimes a judge needs to see what's at stake without anyone saying the word. Future. Mr. Lowe knocked just as we were tying shoes. You'll need this, he said, handing me a thermos and a zip bag of oatmeal cookies. Courthouses are where time takes the long way round. He leaned down to Ella. You still the architect? She nodded solemnly. Build something good today, he whispered, even if it's just a straight line. On the drive to school, Ella traced her finger along the window fog, writing letters only she could read. Do I live here now? She asked, very small. You live where the light is, I said. Today the light is here. Tomorrow we'll check again. At the school office, I introduced myself to the secretary, who'd been there since faxes were new. Emergency pickup authorization, I said, offering the form I'd printed at dawn. Mother's number, mine. No release to anyone not on this list until you hear directly from the deputy on this card. She read the names, looked at the card, then at my face, my age, my posture, the steadiness I had dressed in on purpose. We'll flag the file, she said, sliding the folder into a particular drawer where things don't get lost by accident. Back in the car, Lena was quiet the way a field is after harvest. Emptied, sunlit, liable to catch fire at any stray spark. He's going to hate me, she said. Hate, I said, is a sound some men make when they don't have words like grief and disappointed in myself yet. It goes away when they learn the others. You think he can? She asked. I think anyone can, I answered, if they sit still long enough and stop drinking their feelings with ice. We drove to the locksmith on Green Street. New deadbolt, I told the man with forearms like braided rope. Front and back, and a peephole that doesn't wobble. Afternoon appointment, okay? He asked. By 3, I said. We'll be home by then with papers that say what the locks will mean. He nodded, wrote our address in pencil. Old school, permanent enough. At 11:20, we were in the clinic lobby, chairs arranged like confession booths. The TV in the corner looped a slideshow of mountains and slogans about change. At 11:30, Michael walked in alone. He looked worse in daylight. The kind of tired that doesn't sleep. The kind of stubble that isn't style. No, Kira. He kept his eyes on the receptionist's pen as if pens were a species he hadn't seen in the wild. You came, I said, as if I'd just turned around and found him where I'd expected him all along. I almost didn't, he said. Then I did. That's something. It's a door, I said, and stood so we were the same height. He glanced at Lena, then at the floor. I'm not a monster. I know, she said. I'm also not okay, he added, as if the second sentence owed the first rent. I don't want to be who I was last night. That's 2 doors, I said gently. Pick both, the counselor called his name. He took 3 steps, then turned back. Will you wait? He asked, and somehow the question was 4 years old and 32 at once. We will, I said. We brought cookies. He managed a sound that almost remembered how to be a laugh, then disappeared down a hallway that smelled like sanitizer and second chances. Lena and I sat. I poured thermos coffee. We shared a cookie like teenagers who hadn't learned to be careful about sweetness yet. After 40 minutes, the counselor returned alone. He's agreed to a partial hospitalization program, she said. Starting tomorrow. Detox support, group therapy, individual sessions. He'll need family boundaries in writing and a safe, consistent plan for child contact. We're headed to an attorney, I said. Good, she replied. Also, here. She handed me a pamphlet, For the Family That Waits. I didn't read it. I folded it sharp and put it with the deputy's card. Some instructions you read with your back straight and your hands busy. In the parking lot, Michael leaned against a brick pillar, a paper wristband already curled loose on his skin. He looked like a bridge on a cold morning. Steel in him, but not yet warmed to bearing weight. They said if I show up tomorrow, it changes things, he said dully. It does, I said. Tomorrow is what most miracles look like up close. He nodded, swallowed. Can I see her after school? In my living room, I said. An hour, sober, then good night. His jaw tightened like a hinge that needed oil. I want to take her for ice cream. Next week, I answered. If you go every day you say you will. If the counselor says yes. If you bring receipts that smell like coffee instead of whiskey. He hated my conditions the way children hate seatbelts. Right up until the crash they keep you from. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay." He started to leave, then turned back. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on the part of me that wants to want this." "That part is a seed," I said. "Your job is dirt and water. Mine is sun." He snorted, shook his head, and for one brief second his face was the one I used to kiss when it came home with skinned knees. We made it to the attorney's office with 3 minutes to spare. The waiting room had fake ferns and real silence. When our name was called, we walked into a conference room where the lawyer, a small woman with iron-colored hair and eyes like calibrated instruments, stood to greet us. "I'm Mara," she said. "Tell me the worst parts first." Lena did. She told the story without dressing it in apology. For each date, I slid a paper across the table. For each incident, Mara asked a single clarifying question, then wrote in a tidy slant that looked like it would survive a flood. "We'll file for a temporary protective order today," Mara said when the story was a pile of facts instead of a fog. "We'll request a no alcohol clause during visitation, exchanges at a neutral site, and supervised visits until compliance is documented. We'll include last night's family services contact and your son's treatment plan as exhibits. Judges like to see 2 things: danger addressed and effort made." "What if he shows up angry?" Lena asked. "You call the deputy whose card I see there," Mara replied. "And you don't open doors you didn't invite." Mara slid 2 forms toward us. "This one authorizes me to speak with the clinic about his attendance solely for custody terms. This one designates your mother-in-law," she nodded at me, "as temporary caregiver with pickup and medical consent privileges if you are unavailable. Judges prefer plans that don't wobble." I signed like I was laying bricks. Lena signed like she was naming storms so the weather service could track them. "Go home," Mara said. "The clerk's office will timestamp this within the hour. You'll likely have a preliminary hearing in 48 hours. I'll call with details. Don't post anything on social media. Don't respond to provocations. Document, document, document." On the sidewalk outside, the afternoon had the bright certainty of a new bandage. The locksmith's van was already in front of my house when we pulled up. The man worked quietly, metal clicking in his hands like prayer beads. "Peephole won't wobble now," he said when he finished. "Deadbolt set. Give the keys names if you like. Helps you keep track." I looked at the brass in my palm. 3 shapes of the same permission. "This is home," I said, passing one to Lena. "This is door that learned better," I told Ella, who giggled as if doors could go to school. "And this," I said, tucking the 3rd into the ashtray I used for buttons, "is in case of fire." At 3:30, the school secretary buzzed us in. Ella barreled down the hall with a construction paper crown and a backpack full of crumbs. "We did clouds," she announced. "Mine rained glitter." She peered up at me. "Did you do your list?" "All of it," I said, "even the part where we breathe." We were halfway to the car when Michael's truck turned onto the street. He parked a polite distance away, hands visible on the wheel before he got out. A lesson learned in a lobby where counselors say things like, safe contact and practice respect. He walked to us, stopping at the line where sunlight gave way to shade. "Hey, Bug," he said softly. "How was school?" "Clouds," she said, holding up the crown. "Glitter rain." He swallowed, smiled. "Beautiful," he looked at Lena. "I start tomorrow. 9 a.m. They said I can send you a schedule so you know I'm there." "Send it," she said. "Not mean, not gentle. True." He looked at me. "1 hour?" "In the living room," I said. "We already picked a game that doesn't need winning." At home, he sat cross-legged on the rug, while Ella sorted dominoes into lines that made no sense, and all the sense in the world. He drank water. He didn't glance at the kitchen like a thirsty man does when there's a bottle in the cabinet he knows by touch. When the hour chimed on the stove clock, he stood without us asking. "Good night, Daddy," Ella said. She handed him a domino with 6 bright dots. "For your pocket." "I'll keep it," he said, and his voice frayed along the edges of the promise like cloth that had been used properly. At the door, he turned. "I will show up tomorrow." "I know where the sun is," I said, and opened the new deadbolt from the inside. He left. The house listened. The list on the envelope had every line crossed through except plan, which isn't a line you finish, only one you redraw as life moves its furniture. After dinner, I took a ribbon from the grocery sack, white with blue flowers. I tied the smallest bow around the bear's wrist. "You can keep that," I told Ella. "It's a rule breaker that keeps very good rules." She nodded gravely, as if entrusted with a law. Then she leaned against my hip the way children do with chairs they trust not to tip. Lena stood at the sink, looking out at the porch light we'd left on, even though no one was missing. "You moved the world today," she said quietly. "No," I said, drying a plate. "We just put names on doors." Outside, night gathered like a warm coat. The new peephole held steady against the dark. I wrote 3 fresh words on the chalkboard before bed. Tomorrow. Together. On time. Words are the smallest hammers. They fix what hands alone can't reach. Morning arrived punctual as a promise. I woke to the sound of pencils. Ella at the kitchen table drawing the courthouse with windows like squares of toast. Lena poured cereal into bowls as if quiet were a job she meant to keep. The chalkboard still said tomorrow. Together. On time. Well, tomorrow had become today, and together meant shoes tied, papers stacked, dignity ironed flat. At 8, the clinic's number flashed on my phone. A counselor with a crisp voice. Leah confirmed, "He checked in at 8:57. We've got him." A breath I'd been holding for years left my chest without asking permission. We dressed the day in calm. Lena chose a navy blouse that could translate in any room. School, clinic, court. I wore my pew blue cardigan, the one that makes receptionists call me ma'am, and clerks find the right form the first time. Ella wore her construction paper crown to breakfast and then, very solemnly, set it on the mantel facing outward, as if the house itself needed courage. On the drive downtown, the river ran beside us, brown and fast, full of melted snow and grit. I thought of how water changes rock the same way habits change people. Slow, then suddenly, the courthouse steps had been scrubbed by 1,000 storms. Today we would add our weather to the stone. Security lines, elevators, hallway benches, where families rearrange themselves into legal shapes. We found the clerk's window where a woman with eyes that had seen every kind of truth stamped our packet with a thud you could feel in your ribs. "Mara's already filed your petition," she said, sliding a yellow sheet under the glass. "Preliminary hearing in 20 minutes. Courtroom 4B, you'll be fine. Fine is what you say when words like faith and fragile are too much for a hallway." We sat outside. 4B. The door opened and shut, around other people's endings and beginnings. I handed Ella a picture book, and she traced the edge of each page like she was keeping it from flying away. Lena's knee bounced. I set my hand on it. "We don't run from this room," I said. "We walk into it like a front door." When they called our case, the judge looked like he'd been carved from a patient kind of wood. Mara stood with her tidy slant of notes and let Lena speak first. Truth came out clean. Dates, not daggers. Facts, not fire. I offered the deputy's card. The clinic attendance confirmation Leah had just emailed. The family services visit record. Mara threaded them together with a simple string. Safety now, responsibility always. Michael came in halfway through, an orderly shadowing him as if accountability could be a person. He looked stunned by the lights, like the courtroom had opened under his feet and not around him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The band on his wrist spoke in a language judges understand. The judge removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, I like it when a problem comes to me with its tools. He signed the emergency order. No alcohol clause. Supervised exchanges at the family center. Temporary custody to Lena. Ella to remain at my address after school. Until further order of this court. He scheduled a review. The gavel didn't bang. He simply nodded as if a door had been closed against weather we could not afford to let inside. In the hallway afterward, the air felt oddly new, as though someone had replaced it while we were speaking. Michael approached carefully, hands visible, voice low. I'll do the center. I'll do all of it. He glanced at Ella, then away, then back. I start group at 1. Good. Mara said, show up. Showing up is how you argue your case to the future. We walked out onto the steps. Reporters were nowhere. The world does not send cameras for families that do not explode. I preferred it that way. Quiet victories hold better. On the sidewalk, a familiar horn split the calm. Kira, in that same too bright blouse, leaned out the passenger window of a car that did not belong to her. You're really letting them do you like this? She called to Michael, loud enough for the pigeons to shuffle. You're a man, act like one. Michael flinched. Old habits rattled their cups. Lena's jaw set, but she didn't move. I stepped forward, not to fight, but to measure. Ma'am, I said, because as my mother taught me, you can put a siren into any word if you say it correctly. We are finished here. I pointed to the printed order tucked in my folder. The law packed up and came with us. She sneered, tossed her hair. You think paper can keep people apart? No, I said, but it can keep them in one piece. Michael stared at his shoes until Kira snorted, slammed the car into gear, and left in a spray of wet little stones. We took the long way back to the car so Ella could count pigeons. On the drive to school, she asked, Is Daddy in trouble? There are answers you can file and answers you can live inside. He's in help, I said. It looks the same from far away. The afternoon folded into its own kind of rhythm. We picked up a second-hand dresser from a church basement for the spare room. Drawers that stuck just enough to feel stubborn, knobs to polish, space for a life that needed a place to put itself. Mr. Lowe and his grandson lugged it inside, grinning about good wood, as if trees were a cousin you could cheer for. At 3:30, the Family Visitation Center called to confirm tomorrow's intake for supervised exchanges and sent a list that read like common sense written down. Neutral tone. No gifts to bribe. No promises you can't live with. Keep your goodbye short, so... Hello, tomorrow has a place to land. I stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pear. By dusk, the locksmith returned to add a chain at Lena's request. A polite chain, she said. One that says, we see you, but not yet. He laughed and installed it like he was planting fence posts in thin ground. The phone rang at 7. A number we didn't recognize. I let the machine answer. Old machines are better at absorbing anger than new people. Kira's voice poured into the room. Sugared rage. You're ruining him. He needs his kid. You two hens... I pressed delete before the ending could set fire to our evening. Lena stared at the phone as if it might bite. She's a symptom, I said, not a diagnosis. I put the handset back in its cradle the way you lay a baby down after it finally sleeps. Michael called at 9. I made it through the first group, he said, like he'd run a mile he wasn't sure his lungs could remember. It was awful and good. That's grief, I said. It keeps time like that. They gave me a list, he continued. Triggers, boundaries, people I need to not be, people I need near me. A pause. You're on the near list. Good, I said. Tomorrow you can graduate to on time. At 10 I walked the house in my stocking feet, performing the old liturgy. Stove off, windows latched, porch light on. Ella's crown watched from the mantel. The dresser looked at home already, as if it had been waiting in the church basement for the exact day a child would need a drawer that stuck until it learned her name. I wrote 3 new words on the chalkboard. Paper made real. We slept as if the house were rocking us on a shallow sea. At dawn, light found the peephole and settled there like a coin. The next day, the plan continued like a hymn with new verses. Clinic at 9, visitation center orientation at noon, school at 3. Michael kept his times. He sent pictures of a whiteboard covered in messy honesty. I drink when I feel small. I lie when I plan to fail. I am not a monster. I am a man who forgot his breaks. He did not ask for more than an hour with Ella. He did not ask for less. He brought her a library card instead of a toy, and let her choose a book about foxes who build houses out of snow. On the third day, a storm moved in, sharp and fast, the kind that wrings out the sky and the lost at the same time. At the center, as Lena signed in, Kira appeared in the parking lot like a rumor that had grown legs. "You think a piece of paper can keep me away from my man?" She shouted, stepping into the space where the sidewalk met our patients. A security guard moved toward her. Michael put up both hands before anyone else had to. "Kira," he said, voice steady in a way I did not recognize yet and hoped to get used to. "I'm not your anything right now. I'm a father. Fathers go inside and keep their promises." She spat a word that makes flowers hide and stamped her heel in the puddle. The guard guided her back and she went, but not before slapping the hood of her car once, as if punctuation could be violence. Inside, Ella read her fox book under a mural of trees, while Michael listened with both eyes. When goodbye time came, he didn't argue with the clock. He kissed the top of her hair like a man who understood locks are not insults. They are instructions. That night, the house felt taller, as if we'd added a floor no one could see. Lena sang while she wiped the table. A small old song with a melody like a rope you could grab if the boat shifted. "I didn't know," she said, catching me listening. "I didn't know relief could be this quiet." "Quiet is just peace doing its paperwork," I said, and she laughed, a sound with round edges. The review hearing came a week later, faster than time usually raises its hand. Judge Patient Wood checked his calendar and his conscience and kept the order in place. "I see effort," he said, looking at Michael. "I also see a history. Keep them both in the room." He added an addendum. Random breath tests at the center's discretion, parenting class enrollment for both parents, and a line that read like a blessing. Grandmother's residence designated as after-school safe harbor. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, Michael stood between us like a bridge learning where to put its weight. "I found a sponsor," he said, eyes clear in a way that made me ache for the boy in there, the man becoming. "He's annoying," he added, a hint of grin, which is probably why I need him. "Annoying is what accountability sounds like when you've only ever listened to excuses," I said. He nodded, not arguing with truth just because it didn't flatter him. We walked to the car. Mr. Lowe's grandson had drawn a chalk hopscotch on the sidewalk. Ella skipped the boxes with professional seriousness, then turned and beckoned. "Your turn, Daddy." Michael looked at his shoes, at the boxes, at us. "I'm 32, he muttered. 32 is just two 16-year-olds stacked neatly," I said. "Hop!" He hopped, awkward, arms flailing a little, landing with both feet on home. Ella squealed. Lena clapped once, surprised at herself. The sky, traitor that it is, considered tears and then decided on sun. Back at the house, I opened the new chain. Polite as promised. The porch smelled like damp wood and lemon oil. I set 3 cups on the counter without counting how many people were here. I just knew whose names were on the day. The chalkboard waited for the next line. We had reached the moment where choices stop sounding like speeches and start sounding like habits. The tools were on the table. Paper, keys, times, names. We had put them in our pockets and not lost them. The storm had not been bribed into dissolving. It had been addressed, bounded, given a fence and a gate with hinges that didn't squeal. In the living room, Ella lined up her dominoes and handed Michael the one with 6 bright dots again. "This is so you don't forget," she said. He closed his fist around it. "I won't," he said. "He might. People do. But today, the word sat in the room without wobbling. I tied a fresh ribbon, white with blue flowers, on the key labeled home, and hung it on the hook by the door. "In case we forget what opens this," I said, not to anyone, not to everyone. The house breathed with us, as if it had been waiting years to exhale. Outside, the maple shook off a few tired leaves it had been pretending still belonged. Inside, we prepared for the next thing we could not control, by naming what we could. Dinner at 6, lights at 9, court again in 14 days, clinic every morning, Ella's spelling list on Thursday, bridge, promise, gentle, return. We did not know what the world would ask of us next, but for the first time in a long time, we could answer together. 3 weeks later, the calendar began to look less like a battlefield and more like a map. Each day had a small purpose written, in careful ink. Clinic, class, visit, dinner, sleep, consistency. Such an ordinary word had become our miracle. The trees outside were turning, and the maple's leaves had started to drop like slow confetti. I swept them from the porch each morning, not because they needed it, but because ritual helps us remember we're still here. Michael was keeping his promises. He sent photos of his signed attendance sheets, of his coffee mug in group therapy, of the same counselor whose eyes seemed to hold equal parts mercy and warning. Lena didn't answer his texts, but she read them, sometimes twice. At the visitation center, Ella's drawings changed, from clouds with tears to suns with arms. One week, she drew the 3 of us together, me, Mommy, and Daddy, standing under a roof shaped like a heart. She gave it to Michael, who stared at it for a long time before folding it carefully into his wallet. The counselor called me after their 3rd session. "He's trying," she said. "He's angry, he's ashamed, but he's here. I think he's finally looking in the mirror without arguing with it." That night, I wrote one new word on the chalkboard. Healing. It felt too early, but hope has its own stubborn timing. Then, like weather that refuses to read forecasts, the storm returned. It was a Friday evening. Lena was folding laundry when the phone rang. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, but it called again. And again. Finally, I answered. A man's voice, tense official, spoke quickly. "Is this June Carter? Your son's been admitted to County General. Possible alcohol relapse. Non-fatal, but he's under observation." Lena's hands went still in the middle of a folded towel. Ella, sitting on the floor with her crayons, looked up at our faces and went silent without knowing why. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and second chances. When we reached his room, Michael was half sitting, half sinking into the bed, IV in his arm, skin gray from exhaustion. He opened his eyes when he heard us, shame arriving faster than consciousness. "Before you say anything," he muttered. "I didn't drink. It wasn't like that." "Then what?" I asked. He took a shaky breath. "I slipped on black ice outside the clinic. They thought I'd passed out drunk. They tested me. Nothing, I swear." The nurse confirmed it quietly at the door. "No alcohol. Concussion, mild. He's lucky." Lena exhaled a sound halfway between disbelief and relief. He looked at her, eyes red but honest. "I thought you'd think I messed up." She said nothing, only reached out and straightened his blanket. "Sometimes forgiveness starts as muscle memory. I didn't call because..." He paused. "I thought maybe you'd all stopped waiting for me." I pulled up a chair. We don't stop waiting. We just stop worrying about when. He came home 3 days later, to his own apartment, not ours. A small place near the bus stop, sparsely furnished, with a pot of basil on the sill, and a stack of self-help books he actually opened. He invited us over the next week for dinner. "Nothing fancy, just proof of life," he'd said. We brought salad and pie. He'd made pasta. The sauce was thin but earnest. He wore a shirt I hadn't seen since college, sleeves rolled, expression cautious but proud. When Ella ran in and hugged his leg, he crouched down and said, "You grew taller again. That's cheating," she laughed, the kind that fills a room like light through glass. Halfway through dinner, he said, "There's something I want to tell you." Lena and I looked at each other, braced for news with edges. Instead, he said, "They asked me to speak next week, at the clinic, to newcomers, about day 1. Will you?" I asked. He nodded. I think I need to hear myself say it out loud. The next Friday, we sat in the back of a small hall that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and courage. The chairs were mismatched, the lights too bright. But when he walked up to the microphone, his posture was unshaken. "My name is Michael," he began, "and I'm rebuilding my story." He told them about the bottle, the lies, the anger. He didn't mention names, just truth. He said, "My mother left her door open, even when she should have locked it. My ex-wife protected our daughter when I didn't. And my daughter, she reminds me daily that people don't have to forgive you, to keep hoping you'll do better." Then he smiled. Small, tired, real. I used to think love meant never falling. Turns out it means learning how to get back up without stepping on the ones who helped you stand. The room was quiet in that holy way silence gets when it's been earned. When he stepped down, he found Ella in the front row, holding up a tiny sign she'd drawn herself. "Good job, Daddy." He blinked, swallowed hard, and kissed her forehead. "That's my sermon done," he whispered. That night, back at my house, we sat by the fire again. The same place Lena and Ella had first found warmth weeks ago. The air smelled of wood and relief. Lena said softly, "I didn't think I'd ever see him like that again." "People return in strange shapes," I said. "Sometimes it takes breaking to fit back into grace." Ella looked between us, eyes wide. "Is Daddy fixed now?" I smiled at her. "He's fixing, like all of us. But even peace has a test." A week later, a letter arrived. Official, stamped, from the court. The review hearing would finalize custody. If all continued well, Michael could move to joint visitation within months. Lena read it twice. "It feels fast," she said. "Too soon." "Time doesn't ask us if we're ready," I replied. "It just offers the next step." Till that night, she packed a small bag, just in case. Not out of fear, but because people who've lived through storms always keep an umbrella near the door. The morning of the hearing, Michael arrived early. He wore a tie, crooked but sincere. He handed Lena a sealed envelope. "For you. Read it later," he said. In court, the judge reviewed his progress. Tests clean, attendance perfect, therapy ongoing. Then he turned to Lena. "Do you have any objection to limited shared custody?" Lena looked at Michael, really looked, and said, "Not if he keeps doing what he's doing." The gavel dropped softly, and just like that, the house of paper became a home of decisions. Outside, sunlight split through the courthouse glass, scattering across the steps. Michael exhaled. Ella ran to him. Lena stood beside me, whispering, "I'm not sure what happens now." "Then it's finally living again," I said. "Not surviving. Living." That evening, after dinner, I opened the envelope he'd given Lena. She handed it to me with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter, handwritten. "Mom, you were right. Doors can save people. But I think I finally understand. It's not just about who you let in. It's about who you stop letting out. I'm keeping myself this time. Love, Michael." I set the letter down and wiped my eyes. Outside, rain started again, gentle as forgiveness. For once, I didn't close the window. For a while, everything was steady. Too steady. Almost fragile in its perfection. Mornings came with coffee and small laughter. Evenings went with bedtime stories and unsaid fears folded under pillows. We had learned to live without walking on eggshells, but still, everyone moved softly, like the floor remembered. Michael called every day after his group sessions, He sounded clearer, lighter. Sometimes he would drop by the house just to sit on the porch, help Ella feed the birds, or talk about how silence was harder than temptation. I knew that tone. It was the sound of a man who was finally living without rehearsal. Then, one Thursday evening, the past arrived in a dress that smelled like trouble. Kira. Lena was closing the curtains when she saw her standing across the street, leaning on a red car that looked borrowed. She wasn't yelling, not yet, just staring. I stepped out onto the porch. The air had that dry stillness before a storm. "Kira!" I called. Calm as a prayer you say to an empty church. "You should leave," she smiled, all teeth. "You think I came for him? Please. He's busy with his therapy cult." She pulled something from her bag. An envelope. "He owes me, you know. A favor, a car payment. A few things I helped him cover when he was at his worst." I sighed. "Send the bill to his attorney." "Oh, I did," she said. "But it's not about money. It's about making sure he remembers who helped him fall." She dropped the envelope on the porch rail and turned to leave. "Tell your golden boy he can't buy redemption with a few therapy sessions." When she drove off, the world didn't move for a full minute. Even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. Lena came outside. What did she want? "Attention," I said. "Don't give it to her." I picked up the envelope, half expecting poison. Inside were old photos. Michael at a bar, glass in hand, smiling a smile I didn't recognize anymore, scrawled on the back of one. "He'll always be mine when he falls again." I burned them that night, one by one, in the kitchen sink. The smoke rose steady, leaving behind a single truth. No one owns the redeemed. The next morning, Michael showed up earlier than usual. His eyes were wide, but not fearful. Furious. "She called me," he said, gripping the porch railing. "Said she's telling the court I've been drinking again. Said she's got proof. You haven't," I said. "It wasn't a question." "No," he said. "But proof doesn't have to be true. Just loud." Lena came out behind me, holding a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "What has she gained from this?" He laughed without humor. "Attention, maybe. Or company in the dark." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Then we fight with light." We spent the next few hours gathering everything. Clinic records, counselor statements, time logs, receipts, texts. Lena called Mara, who promised to file a preemptive notice before any claim could be made. "Rumors are weeds," she said on the phone. "Best to pull them before they flower." That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the porch through the peephole, waiting for headlights that didn't come. Sometimes victory looks like nothing happening. 3 days later, we were summoned to the family court again. Kira was there. Makeup flawless, eyes cold, voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "I just want what's best for Ella," she told the judge. "But I think Michael's relapse could put her in danger." Mara stood, voice sharp enough to slice the lie clean. "Your Honor, the clinic has provided full verification of my client's sobriety and attendance. Additionally, this woman has no legal standing in the custody matter." The judge nodded. "Ms. Kira, you are dismissed. And let me be clear. If this is harassment, the next paper filed will bear your name." Kira's face cracked like ice under weight. She turned, eyes locking on me. "You think this is over?" I didn't answer. Some storms end when you stop clapping for the thunder. Outside the courtroom, Michael sat on the steps, hands trembling. Not from fear, but from restraint. "I wanted to scream at her," he said. But all I could think was, that's who I used to be. "That's growth," I said softly. "It's quieter than revenge." He nodded, wiping his face. "I'm tired, Mom." "You're supposed to be," I said. "You've been carrying an entire person you no longer are." Weeks passed. The leaves finished their fall, and winter crept in slow, steady, and clean. Michael found a new job, a warehouse position, steady hours, decent pay. He said it felt good to come home tired from work instead of regret. Lena started volunteering at the visitation center, helping other mothers who arrived with trembling hands and borrowed hope. Ella was thriving, reading, laughing, sleeping without nightmares. And me? I found myself watching sunsets again without wondering what might go wrong before morning. Then came Christmas Eve. The house was alive with smells, cinnamon, firewood, and forgiveness. Michael brought a small tree from his apartment. Ella decorated it with paper hearts and mismatched ribbons. Lena baked pies while I hummed a hymn from my childhood I hadn't remembered in years. At dinner, Michael stood and raised his glass of sparkling cider. To the people who didn't give up when I did, we clinked glasses. Ella giggled at the bubbles. It felt like time had folded back into something gentle. After dinner, while Lena washed dishes and Ella played near the fire, Michael came to sit beside me. "I got an email," he said quietly. "The clinic asked me to mentor 2 new guys. They said my story might help." "That's how you stay healed," I said. "You turn your scars into directions." He smiled. "I want to thank you for everything." "You already did," I said. "You're here." He nodded. "Still, I was thinking, maybe it's time I took the house off your hands, the one you gave me years ago, before I lost it." I looked at him carefully. "You want to buy it back?" "No," he said. "I want to earn it back." I laughed, softly, but with every part of me that remembered the night he'd thrown my things out the window. "Then you already have." At midnight, after they'd gone, I stepped out onto the porch. The world was quiet except for the hum of winter air. The maple tree stood bare now, its branches spread like a question still waiting for an answer. I looked up at the stars and thought about all the doors that had opened and closed this year. How love isn't a gift, it's a practice. How forgiveness isn't weakness, it's maintenance. And how sometimes, at 2 in the morning or 20 years too late, someone still knocks. And this time, they're not alone. Inside, Ella's drawing still hung on the wall, 3 figures beneath a heart-shaped roof. But now she'd added one more, a small star above it, labeled carefully in her uneven handwriting. Grace. The same name she'd whispered months ago without knowing why. I smiled. "So that's who was knocking," I said to the quiet. Then I turned off the porch light. Not because the night was safe, but because for once the light was coming from inside. Winter pressed its forehead to the windows and breathed. By January, the town wore a hush, the kind that makes every sound important. We had learned our new music: clinic, work, visitation, dinner, sleep. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And honest is a blanket that warms slow and deep. The first snow came like forgiveness, quiet, covering the old footprints without pretending there hadn't been any. I watched Ella press her hand into the drift on the porch rail and laugh at the small cave her fingers made. Michael shoveled the walk in a knit hat I remembered mending, the seam finally holding. "Court review is in 10 days, he said, leaning on the shovel. "I keep thinking about how many doors I slammed to get here." "Then practice opening them," I said. "Start with this one." He lifted the latch gently and grinned like a boy who'd found the trick to a stubborn box. The storm hit on a Tuesday night. Hard and sudden, snow thick as sleep, wind like a long, low warning. Power flickered once, twice, and then the house exhaled into the dark. I lit the candle on the mantel, the one that smells faintly of apples in autumn. Lena checked her phone. No service. Ella curled against me, bare tucked under her chin. A banging sounded down the block. Trash can lids, a loose gate. Winter making percussion of what we hadn't tied down. Then headlights carved the whiteness and stopped at the curb. My heart climbed my ribs before I could tell it not to. Old reflex. But when the driver's door opened, Michael stepped out, snow to his ankles. A flashlight in one hand, a small generator in the other. Figured the neighborhood would go dark, he said, breath-making halos. Brought soup, batteries, and the stubborn kind of optimism. He set the generator on the back porch and coaxed it to life. Patient, precise, coaxing a cough into a purr. Within minutes, a soft lamp lit the kitchen like a promise kept. I looked at him over my shoulder. You are becoming the man I prayed for. He shook his head. I'm just keeping my list. We were ladling soup when a car fishtailed into the street and kissed the curb with a thud. A door flew open. Kira stumbled out, coat flapping, voice already too loud for the storm. My gut went cold. Snow doesn't muffle every kind of danger. Michael straightened. Stay inside, he said to Lena, and stepped onto the porch. I followed him. Some doors you don't let a son stand in alone. Kira's eyeliner had bled into smoky wings. She held her phone high like a torch. There you are, she sang, breath sugared and sharp. Hero of the month. The court should see you now. Playing house with the old lady and your loyal ex-wife. Turn around, Michael said, calm as the lamp. Road's not safe. You shouldn't have driven, she laughed. You don't tell me what to do. You never did. Not tonight, he said. Tonight I tell myself what to do. She swayed, eyes landing on the window where Ella's silhouette clung to the glass. There's the prize, she said. The reason you pretend you're new. Michael stepped off the porch and planted his boots in the snow as if he were setting posts. You need to leave, he said, voice steady, words spaced like fence rails. Now, she lifted the phone closer to his face. Go on, hit me. Give me proof. He didn't move. Proof is for people who doubt. I don't doubt myself tonight. Her smile cracked. I'll ruin you, she hissed. Already tried, he said softly. It didn't take. I dialed the deputy from the hall table, fingers memorizing the numbers before my fear could forget them. Stay on the line, the dispatcher said. Units are near. Wind swept a sheet of snow between them like a curtain. For a moment I saw 3 ghosts. The boy who used to run to me with skinned knees, the man who staggered past his own mercy, and the person he was now, feet square, breath even, hands empty on purpose. Blue lights painted the white street with a borrowed ocean. The deputy from the first week stepped out, hat low, voice easy. Ma'am, you're unsteady. Let's get you somewhere warm and lawful. Kira spat a word that bounced off the night and came back small. Michael didn't look at her. He looked at me. I'm okay. I believed him. They guided her to the cruiser. Not roughly, just firmly. The way you carry something fragile that keeps insisting it's stone. As the lights drifted away, the street fell into a hush, so complete, I could hear snow gathering on the mailbox. Michael turned toward the house, shoulders dropping. The shiver that ran through him wasn't all cold. Inside, Ella ran to him, small hands on his sleeves. You didn't shout, she said, surprised and proud. No, he answered, kneeling so they could share a breath. I didn't shout. He ate soup at our table with pink cheeks and steady hands. When the generator hiccuped, he was already on the porch, adjusting a vent, listening to the engine like a friend speaking softly. We slept with the lamp on and the fear off. The review hearing came with clear roads and a sky that had forgiven itself for being dramatic. We walked into 4B with scarves and paper and the kind of quiet that comes after a test you didn't cheat to pass. Mara stood straight as a yardstick. Your Honor, my client has complied with every requirement, maintained sobriety as verified by random testing, established stable housing and employment, and demonstrated protective decision-making during a weather emergency involving third-party harassment. She slid a report across. The deputy's note from the storm sat on top like a stamp. The judge read, nodded, looked at Michael. Say, out loud, what changes today if I expand your time? Michael didn't rush. Nothing and everything, he said. I keep doing what I'm doing, and I get to read my daughter a bedtime story twice a week, in my own living room, with the lamp on and the phone off. Specificity is a love language, the judge murmured. He signed. Shared legal custody remains with physical arrangements per Schedule A. Exchange is at the center for now. No alcohol clause continues. Grandmother's home remains designated safe harbor. The gavel touched wood like a benediction. In the hallway, Michael leaned against the wall, as if someone had finally set down the end of a rope he'd been pulling alone. Lena held out her hand. He took it. Not a reunion, not a new beginning. Just a moment of two people acknowledging the shape of the bridge between them. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," she answered, and the generosity tucked into "you're" made something behind my ribs loosen. The night of his first bedtime, he brought a book with foxes and a thermos of cocoa he'd made himself. He sat on the rug. Ella pretended not to be excited, then failed spectacularly, and climbed into his lap. He read without voices, just his own, steady and warm. When he reached the last page, he closed the book and didn't promise anything he didn't own. "Good night, Daddy," she said, pressing the domino with 6 bright dots into his palm again. He smiled. "I brought you something too." He handed her a key on a loop of ribbon, white with blue flowers. "It doesn't open anything yet," he said. "But when you're older it will. I'm just getting it used to your hand." Ella looked at me, eyes round. "Is it a pretend key?" "It's a future key," I said. "They work if you keep them safe." He hung his own key, labeled home, on the hook by the door next to mine. 2 small shapes of the same permission. After Ella slept, Lena and I stood on the porch with our coats open to the clean cold. Snow squeaked under Michael's boots as he crossed the yard to his truck. He turned back once, lifted a hand. "Not goodbye, not yet. Just still here. Do you ever stop fearing the backslide?" Lena asked. "No," I said. "But fear gets tired when it has to compete with evidence." We watched our breath fade and return. The world was ordinary and enormous. On Saturday, the clinic held its 90-day ceremony. The room was the same. The cheap coffee, the earnest chairs. But the light felt different, as if each story had opened a window you couldn't see. They called names. People stood, faces full of dents they wore, without apology. Michael C. He walked up, shook the counselor's hand, and took a small coin, brass and unglamorous. He held it like a relic and then like a tool. "Say something if you want," the counselor offered. He nodded. "I used to think I was falling into a hole," he said. "Turns out I was falling into the shape of people holding me. I just didn't know how to be still enough to notice." He looked at me, at Lena, at Ella in the front row, with her crown of construction paper, and new confidence. "I'm going to keep choosing the boring miracle," he said. "Every day." We clapped the kind of clap you give a sunrise, applauding not the light, but the fact that it keeps showing up. Afterward in the parking lot, he slipped the coin into Ella's mittened hand. "What is it?" she asked. "A promise you can carry," he said. "If I ever forget, you can make it ring in your pocket for me." She shook it once, heard the soft chime, and nodded as if charged with a mission. That evening when they'd gone, I set out 3 cups as if they might still be here. Habit, hope, hospitality. I tied a fresh ribbon, white with blue flowers, around the hook that held the keys. Then I wrote one line on the chalkboard. Paper made real, life made steady. Outside, the snow kept its slow work of smoothing. Inside, I listened to the house breathe, to the silence that wasn't empty anymore. Climax, people think, is fireworks. But sometimes it's a door that stays shut when it should, and opens when it must, and never again slams itself on the hands that hold it. We had reached the top of the hill. Tomorrow we would start down the other side, careful, grateful, lighter. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to sleep through the night without leaving the porch light on. Not because I no longer believed someone might come, but because I finally trusted they could find their own key. Spring came the way mercy does, without asking who deserved it. The maple put out shy green tongues. The porch boards lost their winter creak. And in the morning, sunlight found the peephole and turned it into a tiny, faithful moon. Life simplified itself into honest chores. Mondays meant school drop-off and laundry. Tuesdays, counseling and the grocery. Wednesdays, visitation exchanges with coffee in lidded cups and hellos that didn't wobble. Thursdays, spaghetti and a board game no one needed to win. Fridays, a quiet check-in. Are we still keeping our word? Most weeks the answer was yes. Some weeks the answer was trying. That counted too. Michael kept going. Clinic, meetings, work, dinner in his small apartment, with the basil pot that finally took to the sun. He learned to plan for afternoons that used to swallow him. He learned which songs sparked his old storms, and which ones steadied him like handrails. He learned the names of men who had lost everything, and still found a way to arrive on time. He learned to keep a cheap notebook in his pocket so his feelings had a place to land before his hands did. Lena found a different steadiness. She took the parenting class the court suggested and circled half the pages, not because she didn't know how to love, but because love needs new tools when the roof has leaked. She started bringing spare snacks to the visitation center, the kind that don't crumble in a child's fists, and a small basket of hair ties because no one thinks of hair ties on hard days. The staff began to nod when she walked in, as if quiet could be a credential. Ella grew taller between breakfast and lunch the way children do in the homes of people who have finally slept. She learned to read the Fox book without moving her lips. She stopped checking the porch light at bedtime. She kept the domino with 6 bright dots in the pocket of her backpack, and sometimes waiting at the curb. I'd hear it knock softly against a pencil like a promise clearing its throat. One Saturday in May, Mr. Lowe came over with a tin of nails and said, "Let's fix that stubborn step." We pried, reset, hammered, measure, mark, strike, until the board found its old honesty. His grandson chalked hopscotch on the walkway and drew a crooked star over the square labeled home. Ella hopped it twice, then turned and held out her hand to Michael. He hopped once, missed, laughed, and tried again. No one kept score. The chalk dust made their palms look like they had been handling small planets. Court became routine. Reviews like well visits instead of emergencies. The judge's hair picked up more silver. His patience kept its shape. He kept the orders simple. Time-honored, tests random, exchanges steady. Kindergarten conference attended by both parents, if they could speak to each other like the adults they intended to be. They did. Not friends, not enemies. Something practical. Like a bridge with a weight limit clearly posted. On a Wednesday evening, we ate on the porch. Sliced tomatoes that tasted like the color red. Bread with butter that remembered cows. Birds insisted on their gossip in the hedge. Michael pushed back his chair and looked at the key hook by the door. My key, his key, the little ribbon loop with the future key nobody could use yet. "I'm moving," he said. Silence fell politely like a napkin. "Across town," he added quickly. "Closer to work, bigger place, not big. Just room for a small bed that isn't a couch when Ella stays, and a bookshelf that isn't pretending." Lena nodded first. "Send the address," she said. "We'll map the new drive." He watched her face the way a pilot reads gauges. When he didn't find a crash there, he exhaled. "I'll need a hand with the boxes," he said, looking at me like he was 14 again, and everything heavy was a test of my love. "I have 2 hands," I said. "They still work. We moved him on a breezy Saturday. Boxes labeled in block letters. Kitchen, winter, papers, Ella." He set the Fox book on the shelf first, then the basil pot in the sun. Then he hung his home key on a hook he installed by the door. He left a second hook empty beside it, the kind of empty that expects company. At dinner that night, pizza on plates that didn't match, we made a small toast with tap water. "To beginning in the middle," I said. Ella added, "To ice cream later," which in her language means to joy you can schedule. We bought ice cream from the man with the white truck who plays the same song until even forgiveness hums along. Ella picked mint because it tastes like snow that went to college. Michael picked vanilla because every new habit needs something that doesn't surprise it. I picked whatever was left, spoon stolen when Ella wasn't looking, because grandmothers have a moral duty to misbehave where sugar is concerned. On the ride home, the sky spilled copper and plum over the tops of houses that had kept other people's stories. I thought about doors, how many we had opened and closed, how carefully we had taught them to behave. I thought about names we had given things, keys and days and rules. Giving the ordinary a name had turned it into a tool. Paper had become real. Life had become steady. That night, after baths and bedtime bargaining and 2 pages of foxes who know the weather, I stood at my own front door and turned the deadbolt with the practiced grace of a musician who has finally learned the right pressure. The chain slid into place with a sound like a sentence ending where it should. I set out 3 cups: habit, hope, hospitality. A 4th too, grace, because the child had labeled the sky with it, and the sky had agreed. On the chalkboard, I erased old lines and wrote 4 new ones. Keep the porch swept. Answer the door slowly. Believe the evidence. Leave 1 hook empty. Before sleep, I walked the house. Stove off. Windows latched. Ribbons loosened from the week's ponytails, resting in a glass by the sink like thin flags after a parade. The dresser drawer that used to stick now slid smooth. Someone had learned not to slam, and the wood had forgiven us. The mantel held the construction paper crown and a vase with dandelions that thought they were flowers. And maybe they were. I paused at the peephole. No headlights, no sirens. Just my own face in miniature, ringed with light. A woman who looked like a grandmother, and a door that looked like a promise. We had both learned not to wobble. I switched off the porch light. Not because the night was harmless, but because the people I love had learned how to carry their own. I left the hall lamp on, a softer beacon. The kind of light you use when you're not waiting for disaster, only for morning. In bed, I let the house breathe me to sleep. I dreamt of keys, cheap brass, nothing fancy. Multiplying on hooks in homes where people were tired of leaving the porch on all night. In the dream, each key had a name. Return. Gentle boundary, try again, somewhere. A small hand rang a coin in a mitten and laughed like bells that finally remembered how. When morning came, it came like it always does. Slow at first, then definite. I put on the kettle and opened the door to a day that smelled like bread about to rise. The maple shook out its new leaves as if practicing an applause we hadn't earned, but could accept anyway. We were not cured. We were not finished. We were awake inside a life we had chosen on purpose. And in the quiet heart of the house, between the hook with 2 keys and the empty one waiting, I understood the thing I had been building toward since the first knock at 2 a.m. Some families survive by leaving the light on. Ours learned to pass the light from hand to hand. Small as a key, steady as a word kept. So no one had to stand outside, alone, ever again. If you've listened this far, maybe you've stood at your own door, wondering whether to open it or walk away. Maybe someone once knocked at 2 a.m. and you didn't know if they brought trouble or truth. Life gives us both, often in the same rain. If this story found a place in you, share it with someone who still leaves their porch light on. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if forgiveness came knocking in the middle of the night? Where are you listening from tonight?